This year, four of the biggest organisations representing the Australian screen industry got together to launch a campaign called Make It Australian. And amongst other things, what they want is to introduce a system whereby the streaming services, your Netflixes and Amazons, are compelled to make Australian stories in Australia. But how do you actually do that? I mean, traditionally TV channels, they take up Australian public airwaves, and that's how the government get to put those regulations over them. Netflix, not so much. So exactly how are they going to mount that argument, and really should they at all? To debate that, we have our guest this week. Matthew Hopkins is the technology editor for pedestrian.tv. When I say Matthew, I sound like your parents.
You do, actually.
Matthew. Very disappointed in you. Olivia Rosenman is from the Expressionist podcast. Before we get to the could part of this, like how they would institute it, let's talk about should. Should they bring in rules about this stuff?
I think we definitely should. I think considering the size of our population, it is very hard for Australian television and filmmakers to actually make it here, and a lot of them actually just leave and go to Hollywood because there's just not enough opportunities here and not enough support. So yes, I think we definitely should. Matt?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the more that we can be doing to nurture our own talent here, the better.
Okay, so the question then is, if you could institute some sort of regulatory change, bearing in mind that, you know, your only real options in terms of a stick are site blocking, which is, you know, what's been applied to things like piracy sites and child pornography sites, stuff like that. If Netflix didn't follow through and they didn't agree to that, do you think any government in this country would move to that point?
No, I mean, I don't. I think it's very hard to force someone like Netflix to do something. And I think that the changes that this coalition of four organisations is pushing for are clever in that they are much more carrot than stick.
Yeah.
So the stick that they want is that they want a quota on the content on these streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime. Australian free-to-air and cable TV has to have a 55% quota. I think 55 is probably a bit high and unrealistic. Europe has just gone ahead with a 20% quota, and I think that's probably more reasonable. But that is only one of the demands that they're making. That I think that the rest are much more carrot-like, trying to incentivise people to come here and make TV and film content, and I think that's much smarter and more possible.
If you just look at the numbers of what gets eyeballs in Australian subscription, commercial and public television, Australian content ranks really highly. And that's great, right? Because in the late 90s, if you looked at the top 10 programs, it was ER, Friends, it was all bought in US product, right? But these days, it's massive Australian product, and Australian product is brand defining. And if you look at the local Australian streamer, Stan, you can see that they've clearly identified that, and that's why they're launching things like Romper Stomper and Wolf Creek. But that doesn't necessarily apply to an international brand that are trying to make things for a global audience. So for you, Matt, what would you do to kind of encourage them, I guess? Where's your carrot?
It's a difficult one because they are, as you said, making content for a global audience. So, I mean, would it be more of like do we subsidise them to make the content, or do we initiate that quota? Not that they would. I mean, we're not a huge market.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't necessarily have to be come here and make Australian content that is for Australian audiences. But you can come here and make, and this is what a lot of these tax incentives are. It's come here and use Australia as your place to film and employ all the other staff that go into like you can make a big American or Canadian production here. We have a lot to offer. We're English speaking. We have highly skilled people in the field. We are very stable.
The ABC have done a co-production with Netflix for Glitch, and Please Like Me was made in co-production with an American streaming service that no longer exists now. And so same with the Get Cracking, the catering show girls. So there are these pathways out there that exist. I guess the question is, if they're already being done, why do we need regulation? Because like those deals are being done on a sort of a granular level.
I have a friend who made a film, an independent film this year or last year, and I had a chat to her last night, and I said, what would you want to change as a young person? You know, she's my age and she's made her first film, and she said, it is really hard for someone my age because it feels like the money and support that is out there is sort of reserved for an older group of people who are already in the know and in the circles, and it's very hard to crack into that. Right. So I guess regulating it just probably means there's more of it, and it makes it more accessible to people who aren't already in that world.
The production that Netflix is making, the first original production that they're filming up in Queensland at the moment, I mean, that has Australian government money in it. It has Screen Australia funding pumped into it as well. So it's like, the system works.
I don't know. The other thing that I think is, why do we think that Australian local content is actually not interesting to Americans and British people? Like, we suck up all the American stuff that doesn't really relate to our lives directly. Why can't we? And I've known people who have found some of that old ABC stuff that's found its way onto Netflix. I shouldn't say found its way, that Netflix has bought.
It fell off the back of the truck and into the server.
But that is another way that they can support the Australian industry, is by sort of buying that back catalogue stuff. I lived overseas for a number of years, and I've had many friends who are not Australian who have found some of that stuff on Netflix and really liked it. And I just think we need to have more confidence in putting the stuff out there, being like, yes, we are different in many ways, but also like you in many ways, and our stuff should be desirable.
There is lots more of this in the podcast edition of Download This Show. It's just like this, only you don't have to look at our faces, which I think we can agree. It's an improvement. Back to you guys.